האם זה באמת סגולה בדוקה? הסגולה ללמוד בזה?
Good evening, Erev Tov, Dobro V'Yetzer. We are in the Zera Shimshon on Parshas Vayikra. We're beginning sefer Vayikra. And we are going to do section number 4, Os Dalid. Before we look at this piece, we're only going to do the first half of this piece, which is rather a lengthy piece. But before we begin, we're going to take a look at a pasuk from our Parsha. This is Vayikra Perek Aleph Pasuk He. V'shachat es ben habakar lifnei Hashem. And he will slaughter the calf in front of Hashem. V'hikrivu b'nei Aharon hakohanim es hadam. And the sons of Aharon, the Kohanim, will bring near the blood. V'zarku es hadam ala mizbeach saviv. And they will throw the blood on the altar all around. Asher Pesach Ohel Moed, that is at the opening of the Ohel Moed, meaning the Mizbeach, that is the Mizbeach HaChitzon, the outer altar, which is placed outside of the opening of the Ohel Moed. So this pasuk is one of the psukim right at the start of our parsha, which talk about the kind of the procedure of, one of the steps in the procedure of bringing a korban, in this case a korban olah, a totally burnt offering. We're going to see that a pivotal question exists, which is, we know that when a person brings an animal as an offering to the Mishkan, to the tabernacle, or to the Beit HaMikdash itself, we know that the reason, one of the reasons for bringing it there, in addition to the fact that that was the place to bring korbanot, was that we need the Kohanim. That's their job, to perform the service, to take the animal and do what needs to be done to bring it as a sacrifice. However, a question exists, which is, what about the very first step, the shlita, the offering, the slaughtering of the animal? Does that step also have to be done by a Kohen, or is it possible that a person who's not a Kohen can slaughter the animal, which is intended intended for a sacrifice, to be brought as a korban? Can a non-Kohen slaughter it, and then a Kohen can take over? And we're going to see that question was the subject of a very, very unusual disagreement in Navi and Sefer Shmuel between the great and venerable Eli HaKohen, Eli the Kohen Gadol, and who was an elderly gentleman at the time, and the very young, amazingly young, as we'll see, Shmuel himself, who was taken in and raised by Eli at the site of the Mishkan. So let's take a look in the Zera Shimshon, Os Dalid, section number 4, Brachos Perek He. In the Talmudic tractate of Brachos, in the 5th chapter, the Gemara states as follows: Vayishchatu es hapar, and they slaughtered the bull. Vayaviu es hanar el Eli, and they brought the young boy, meaning Shmuel, who was, according to Chazal, was 2 years old at the time, or this is when they brought him back to Eli. El Eli, they brought him to Eli. So to give context to this pasuk, what's happening is, very briefly, Shmuel's mother, before Shmuel was born, was a barren woman. Her name was Chana, and she wasn't able to have children. Her husband Elkanah had another wife named Penina, and she was blessed with many children. But Chana wasn't able to have children, and she came to the Mishkan to daven to Hashem, and she met Eli. She encountered Eli, the Kohen Gadol, there. He actually thought that she was drunk. He thought that she was not fully sober, but because of the way she was davening and the way that she was not saying words, you couldn't hear the words that she was saying. As she was moving her lips, he thought she was a drunk woman who was kind of mumbling to herself. However, he it was revealed to him that she was a very righteous woman, and he said to her, he blessed her to have a child, and she had davened and said, if I have a child, I'll bring him back and he will dedicate his life. We will dedicate him for him to come to the Mishkan and to spend his life service here and service ultimately to Yisrael, to the Jewish people. So when she brings him back, they brought an offering, and that's what the pasuk says. They brought the bull and they brought the boy to Eli. The Gemara asks, Mishum de vayishchatu es hapar vayaviu v'chulei. Because they offered the bull as a sacrifice, that's why they brought the boy, meaning Shmuel, to Eli. In other words, the Gemara asks, why in one pasuk does it mention these two things as if they're directly related? Why does it say they slaughtered the bull and they brought the young boy, meaning Shmuel, to Eli? Why put those things together in the same pasuk? How are they directly related? It should be two totally different things, two totally different psukim. Ella, but the Gemara says, Amar lehu Eli. Eli said to them, meaning to Chana and her family, Kiru Kohen Lesi Lishchot. Call a Kohen to come and do the shlita, to come and slaughter the animal that Hannah had brought as a sacrifice. Chazinhu Shmuel, the ko mehadre basar Kohen lemishchai. So little Shmuel saw that they were getting a Kohen, looking around for a Kohen to slaughter the animal. Amar lehu, he said to them, Lama lehu le'ahadore basar Kohen. Why are you going around looking for a Kohen? Shlita bizar keshera. A non-Kohen, a zar, which is a word that refers to a non-Kohen, is kosher, is valid to do shlita, can slaughter the animal. You don't need, little Shmuel said, you don't need to find a Kohen. Just find a regular Jewish person to come slaughter the animal. So this was a staggering thing. Not only was it staggering because you had this little boy talking so precociously and telling people what to do and what not to do, but even more staggering was he was disagreeing with the great Eli HaKohen, which even the biggest Talmidei Chachamim, the biggest Torah scholars, wouldn't have done. But here's Shmuel disagreeing with the great Kohen Gadol Eli. Aituhu lekame de Eli. So they brought him in front of Eli. They brought him to the Kohen Gadol. Amar le, he said to him, meaning Eli, said to Shmuel, little Shmuel, Minol, from where do you know this? From where do you know, little boy, from where do you know this law that you're telling everyone that we don't need a Kohen to slaughter this animal because anybody, even a non-Kohen, can do the shlita, can do the slaughtering? Amar le, Shmuel said to Eli, Mi kisi v'shachat haKohen. Who says that it's written in the Torah that a Kohen should slaughter the animal? V'hikrivu haKohenim ksiv. The Kohanim should bring close the blood, is what the pasuk says. It doesn't say a Kohen should slaughter the animal. It only mentions Kohanim after the animal, after the pasuk. And this is, of course, our pasuk, which we read previously, Perek Aleph, pasuk Hey in Vayikra, the pasuk we read right before we started reading this section. The pasuk says the animal will be slaughtered, shlita will be done, and then v'hikrivu haKohanim es adam, and then the Kohanim will bring the blood to the altar to throw it on the altar. It doesn't mention Kohanim when it talks about shlita. So Shmuel says, Mikabola ve'elach mitzvahs kehuna. Only from the receiving of the blood, meaning after the animal is slaughtered and the blood that's coming out of the animal's neck is collected in a vessel, which is called kabolas hadam, the receiving of the blood, only from that point onwards is there a special mitzvah for a Kohen to be involved. But the very first step of slaughtering the animal, the shechita, does not require a Kohen, as the statement continues. Mikan, from here we see, shahashchita bizar keshera. So Shmuel concluded with these words. We see from the pasuk that a non-Kohen, a zar, is who slaughters the animal for a sacrifice, keshera. That's valid. That's kosher. Okay, so this is how Shmuel explains where he came up with this emphatic statement on his part as a real youngster that they didn't need to get a Kohen to slaughter the animals that his family had brought to offer. Amar le, Eli said to Shmuel, Shapir, it is correct. Continuing to the next page on the right. Ka'amart, what you said. Eli said, I'm sure shocking everyone, shocking all the onlookers, said to, conceded to Shmuel, what you said, little boy, is correct. Mihu, however, mora halacha v'chule. However, teaching the law in front of someone of a halachic authority is not correct. That's not appropriate. So Eli said that Shmuel's understanding of the halacha, his understanding of the law, was accurate. However, he should not have. It's not appropriate to issue a halachic ruling in front of a halachic authority. Osya Chana kotzavcha kameh. So Chana came running and she was crying out in front of him. Ani ha'isha anitzeves imcho bazeh. I'm the woman who was standing with you here back before this boy was born. And Chana, Adkan Lashono, until here's a quote from the Gemara, but Chana basically ran up and saved Shmuel from, entreated with Eli not to have any consequences, any punishments befall Shmuel because he had taught a halacha in front of Eli, which wasn't technically appropriate to do. Because she said, I'm the woman who was here, and I came, and you thought I was drunk, and then you gave me a bracha, and I was davening to Hashem, and I came back to bring karbanos to thank Hashem, and to bring my son Shmuel to devote his life, to live here and devote his life to the Jewish people and to serving Hashem. And Shmuel understood the whole situation. Let's take a look at the next paragraph. The earliest commentators have already shouted out about this story in the Gemara of Brachos. What did Chana see? What did she understand that she said to Eli, Hashta shenitzva imo b'kan? Now I'm the one that was standing here before. Why did she mention that? What does that have to do with what was happening? So one question in the story is, the first question, it's not in order of the story, but the first question that Zera Shimshon poses is, why did Chana come running up and repeat what had happened and remind Eli about she had been there previously, etc., and tell him the story about what had happened? How is that connected to the incident as it had happened, as it had occurred with Shmuel teaching everyone that shlita bizar keshera, that a non-Kohen can slaughter an animal to be used for a sacrifice, and he had done this in front of Eli? Why is she telling the whole story about her original encounter with Eli? That's question one. The od sarach ian, and another thing requires analysis. Me ayin ba hataos leEli lomar. From where did this mistaken thought or mistaken ruling really come to Eli to say shahashchita tricha kohen, that the slaughtering of an animal for a sacrifice requires a kohen? Why was Eli under that impression, and why is that what he was telling everyone? Dizil kari beiravu. This is a case seemingly where a person could simply look at the pasuk, or I'm sorry, where a child could simply, a young child could simply look at the Torah and read the pasuk and see that it doesn't say deloksi v'shachar hakohen. It doesn't say the kohen has to sacrifice an animal. So the question is, why did Eli need Shmuel to come and quote a simple pasuk, apparently, that tells us right from beginning of our Parsha Vayikra that a Kohen is needed after the animal is slaughtered. But to slaughter the animal, you don't need a Kohen. The pasuk doesn't say a Kohen needs to slaughter the animal. How come Eli thought a Kohen needed to slaughter the animal? That's question 2. Ve'od, and another question, meaning the third question, Mahu mitzvahs kehuna. What is this phrase, mitzvahs kehuna? It's a mitzvah of the Kohanim. What is the meaning of the phrase, that phrase that Shmuel said? Lomar, Shmuel could have said, or better, should have said, Mikabola ve'elech tzricha kohen. From the time of receiving the blood, meaning after the slaughtering, when the blood is collected in a vessel, that he should have said tzricha kohen. That's when you need a kohen. But before that, you don't need a kohen. Shmuel could have said that, and it would have been a clearer way of expressing his thought than to say mikan ve'elach mitzvahs kahuna. From here and onward, from the point of receiving the blood in the vessel and all steps after that, is a mitzvah of the kahuna as opposed to tzricha kahuna or tzricha kohen. A kohen is needed. So there are 3 questions here. As we mentioned, the Zera Shimshon, in terms of the way the story happens, brought in the Gemara, asked his first question on the end of the story when Hannah came running up to protect her son. That question we're actually not going to get to in this first half of the piece. We're not going to be able to answer it. We're not going to get to the answer of that question, but the second and third questions, which come from the beginning of the story, we are going to see the Zera Shimshon deal with those 2 questions and resolve them. Let's go to the next paragraph. And we can say, and as the Zera Shimshon often does, he's going to bring us sources and as building blocks to build towards his explanation. So we can say, the Isa Bereish Per Gimel Dizvachim, it states in the 3rd chapter of Mesechus Zvachim, Shehashchita Keshera Bizarim, O Eina Ela Bekohanim. The Gemara actually poses it as a question: is the slaughtering of an animal kosher for that's going to be brought as a sacrifice bizarim with people who are not Kohanim? O Eina Ela Bekohanim, or does the slaughtering have to only be done by Kohanim? Amart, you said, v'chi me'ayin bos, Michlal shenemar, va'atu vonech itcha tishmeres kuhunaschem l'chol dover hamizbeach. So the Gemara brings in a pasuk in which it says that the Kohanim will guard their priesthood for everything that has to do with the Mizbeach, meaning the Kohanim have to be very careful to make sure that everything that has to do with korbanos and sacrifices and involving the Mizbeach, the altar, they have to guard and watch and do everything carefully. And certainly anything that has to only be done by a Kohen, it was their job to make sure that no person who was not a Kohen came to do something he shouldn't have been doing. Yochol af b'shchita. So I might think that this idea of the Kohanim being careful to make sure that only Kohanim do what they are obligated to do would apply to the slaughtering also of an animal, of a korban. Talmud Lomar, the Torah teaches us from our pasuk, v'shachar es ben habokar lifnei Hashem, and the person will slaughter the calf lifnei Hashem, in front of Hashem, v'hikrivu, and then the Kohanim will bring forward the blood. Mikabola ve'elach mitzvahs kehuna. From the time of receiving the blood and moving forward, it's a mitzvah for the Kohanim to be involved, but not before that, not for the shlita. Limed ala shlita, this teaches us about the shlita, the slaughtering, shekeshera b'chol adam. It's kosher if it's done by anyone, even though the person is not a Kohen. So this first paragraph, this first building block, is from the Gemara in Zvachim, is clearly states the issue for us, and the Gemara clearly considers the two possibilities about whether or not you need a Kohen to do shlita for a korban, or you do not need a Kohen. And it uses our pasuk in Vayikra the same exact way that little Shmuel did in the Gemara in Brachos that we opened this piece with, to say it doesn't mention a Kohen for shlita. It only mentions Kohanim after the shlita, when they start doing Kabbalas Hadam, collecting the blood to bring and do the Zrikas Hadam, the throwing of the blood around the Mizbeach. Continuing. Ule'el Perech Beis, and previous to this, in the second chapter of Zvachim, Isa, it states, Mechusar Bigodim Minolon. The Gemara asks, from where do we know that a Kohen who is not wearing the special big day kahuna, the special garments that a Kohen is obligated to wear, from where do we know that if that Kohen performs a service in the Mishkan or the Beis HaMikdash, that it's invalid? Kohen must wear the proper clothing, the big day kahuna, and if the Kohen is not wearing all of the proper garments of the big day kahuna, then whatever service that Kohen performs is not valid. So the Gemara says, how do we know that? The Omar Kra, because the pasuk says, "V'chagarta osam avneit Aharon uvonov," and you should wrap around Aaron and his sons the avneit. That was one of the big day kahuna, kind of like a type of apron. V'chavashta lohem migbaos, and you should put on their hats, their head coverings. V'hoyisa lohem kahuna, and there will be for them a priesthood, lechukas olam, as an eternal statute. So this pasuk, which talks about putting on the big day kahuna, the special clothing for the Kohanim, connects that clothing with the kahuna, with them serving, with these Kohanim serving as Kohanim. So the Gemara continues, Bizman shebigdeihem aleihem, at a time when their clothing is on them, kahunasam aleihem, their kahunaship, their priesthood is on them. Ein bigdeihem aleihem, if their clothing, if all of their priestly garments are not on them, ein kahunasam aleihem, then their kahuna is not on them. They are not there. Any service that they do as Kohanim is invalidated because they're not wearing the big day kahuna. Uperish Rashi on the Gemara in Zavachim explains, top of the next column. Kahunasam teluya bivigdehem. Their kahunaship, their priesthood, their ability to serve as Kohanim depends upon the wearing of their special clothing, their special garments. Ve'ilo, and if not, if they're not wearing their special big day kahuna, havuzorim, they are treated like non-Kohanim. Uvizar, and when it comes to a person who's not a Kohen, Ashkechan, we find the mechil avoda, that this invalidates the avoda, the holy service that was performed. Ad kan Lashono, until here is a quote from Rashi. So Rashi spells it out as explicitly as is possible, based on this Gemara in the second chapter of Maseches Zvachim, which is also emphatically clear that the big day kahuna, the clothes that the Kohanim, that were made for the Kohanim, that the Kohanim were obligated to wear, are absolutely vital. And if a Kohen does not wear the proper clothing, the proper garments, and performs the avoda, then it's invalidated. It's as if he's a zar. It's as if he is a non-Kohen, even though his lineage, even though he's actually a Kohen, it's as if he's not a Kohen until he puts on the big day kahuna to perform the avoda, to perform the service in the Mishkan or the Beis HaMikdash. Next paragraph. Ule'el nami, and also previously in the same Talmudic tractate of Zvachim, it states, Tanya, it was taught in a brisa, vihikrivu, and they would bring close, zo kabbalas hadam. This is referring to the receiving of the blood again, after the shlita was done. B'nei Aharon ha-Kohanim, and it says who's going to bring close the blood? The sons of Aharon, the Kohanim. Shetehei b'kohen kosher u'b'chli shores. It's telling us that you need to have a kosher Kohen, a Kohen with the proper lineage, like, for example, the sons of Aaron, right? Like, that's a paradigmatic example of a Kohen, because Aaron was the first Kohen and his sons were the first Kohanim who were the children of Aharon. And so you need to have a Kohen kosher with the proper lineage, ubichle shores. And you have to have the proper utensils. But here, when it says proper utensils of service, it's referring to the clothing, as we'll see from the next few words. The hainu riboy begodim. The words klishores here mean you have to have the right utensils, meaning the correct garments, the extra additional garments that the Kohanim had to wear when they came to do the avodah, when they came to do the service. So that was learned from our pasuk. Omar Rabbi Akiva agrees with this law about the vital importance of the Kohanim wearing the Bigdei Kahuna, but he learns it in a different way. Ne'amar kan b'nei Aharon, he learns what's called a Zera Shimshon, where a comparison is made based on the usage of the same words in two different places in the Torah. So here it states, regarding the bringing of a korban in the beginning of our Parsha Vayikra, it states b'nei Aharon, the sons of Aharon, v'ne'amar leholon, and it states later on in Sefer Bamidbar, Eile shemos b'nei Aharon hakohanim hamishuchim. These are the names of the sons of Aaron who are the anointed Kohanim. Ma lohalon b'kohen kosher b'chli shares. Just like later on, meaning in Sefer Bamidbar, when it uses the expression B'nei Aharon, it's talking about Kohanim whose lineage is perfect, and B'chlei Shores, and they are wearing the proper clothing. Afkan, so too here in our pasuk in Vayikra, the Kohen Kosher B'chlei Shores, only a kosher Kohen whose lineage is impeccable and who's wearing the proper clothing is allowed to bring the korbanos. So this source that the Zera Shimshon quotes is showing us a new idea, which is that there are two different possible sources, two different possible methods for learning out the idea that a kosher Kohen has to be wearing the proper clothing to be able to do the steps after shechita, after the animal is slaughtered. Next paragraph. V'chosvu sham batosvos, over there in that Gemara, it's written in the Talmudic commentary called Tosvos, Perush b'kuntras. Tosvos says that Rashi, kuntras it means notebook, and it's the nickname, so to speak, that Tosvos used to refer to Rashi. Perush b'kuntras. It is explained in the notebook of Rashi, klei shares, vessels of service, bigdei kahuna. This refers to the clothing that the Kohanim needed to wear. So we've already pointed out that when the Gemara said you need a kosher Kohen and you need the proper vessels of service, that vessels of service in this particular instance refer to the Bigdei Kahuna. So Tosfos says that's in fact how Rashi explains the Gemara. V'koshe, Tosfos says this creates a problem. Dohanaf galon lekomon daf yud zayin mikra. This is learned on a later page in the Gemara from a pasuk. De'ein bigdehem aleihem havu zorim. If they're not wearing the proper clothing, then they are considered non-Kohanim. V'yesh lomar, and we can say, this is all in the Tosfos commentary, the ilav gezerah shava dahacha, if it was not for this gezerah shava that Rabbi Akiva brought, have amrinon, we would have said, ma shehikpida Torah mimuchusar bigodim, we would have thought mistakenly, the fact that the Torah is careful or is particular about a Kohen who's not wearing the correct clothing and invalidates that Kohen service, hainu hecha dechsivi bigodim. That's only restricted to the places in the Torah where it specifically mentions the clothing. Aval hecha delo ksivi bigodim. But in those places where the Torah doesn't specifically mention the clothing that the Kohanim were obligated to wear, we would have thought, no, that it's not necessary, and that if a Kohen doesn't wear the clothing to do those actions, again, those actions where the Torah doesn't specifically mention the Kohanim's clothing, we would have thought that it would have been valid. V'gave nesinas eish v'sidur evorim. And regarding the placing of the fire on the altar and the organizing of the limbs of the sacrifice on the altar, lo have ba'ino begodim mikohen bechihunan. We would have thought that a kohen is not required to wear his special clothing, his special big day kahuna, to do these aspects of the Kohen's avoda, because the Torah doesn't specifically talk about the bigodim, the clothing, when it talks about putting the fire on the mizbech and organizing the parts of the limbs of the animal. Ella midigale rachmana gabe kabola gezera shava, but from the fact that the Torah revealed this gezerah shava, specifically having to do with the receiving of the blood, yalfinon, we learn bechol duchta de hakohen, every place the Torah talks about a kohen, have bechihuno. It's a kohen who's doing his service and wearing his appropriate begodim. So Tosfos explains why we need both the teaching of from the pasuk. That's our pasuk, which turns out to play a central role here in this whole discussion, and also the gezerah shava that Rabbi Akiva brought. Next paragraph. Umikol zeh anu lemedim. From all of these pieces, these building blocks, we learn shekodem sheba Shmuel. Before Shmuel came, hayu sovrim, they thought, Dikra de lechol dover hamizbeach mayri nami b'shchita. Everyone thought, and this was Eli's reasoning, that from the pasuk that talked about all matters of the mizbeach, that the kohanim had to be careful about all matters of the mizbeach, it was talking also about the shlita, about the slaughtering of the animal, diba'in kohen, and they thought it required a kohen. Dichsiv, because the pasuk says, Tishmeru es kehunaschem, you should guard your kahunaship, your priesthood. So the Zera Shimshon, by bringing in different sources where we see this idea that the Kohanim had to be the ones performing the service and non-Kohanim could not perform the service, and that the Kohanim had to wear their special big day kahuna in order for their actions to be validated. From different places, we see that an opening was created, so to speak, for people to make a mistake, and they did make a mistake, and they thought that since we have a pasuk in Bamidbar, which was quoted a few paragraphs ago, in which it talks about the Kohanim guarding all of the work done by Kohanim for everything having to do with the Mizbeach. So they thought everything having to do with the Mizbeach, that's all inclusive. That includes the shlita, the slaughtering of animals that are going to be brought on the Mizbeach. And that also has to be done only by a Kohen. And that's something that the Kohanim had to be careful about to make sure that no non-Kohen could do it. Ad sheba Shmuel ve'amar. And this is what was believed until Shmuel came and said, the mikra, from the pasuk, the vehikrivu b'nei Aaron hakohanim, from what we call our pasuk in the beginning of Vayikra, Parak Aleph, pasuk Hey, that we open this piece with. In that pasuk, anu, we, moving to the next page, column on the right, anu lomdim, we learned the mikabola ve'elach mitzvahs kehuna. Only from receiving of the blood and onward does it become a mitzvah of the kahuna, of the priesthood? And that's why only Kohanim start at that point. But Kohanim aren't needed from the shlita, for the sacrifice. Tahainu sheyehe b'choin kosher b'chlishares. At the point of receiving the blood after the animal is slaughtered, that has to be only a proper Kohen with the proper lineage and wearing the proper begodim, the proper clothing. Only that person can take over. The Hainu Bigdei Kahuna, this means he's wearing the garments of the Kohanim. Mikoach Gezerah Shava Hanizkar La'el, which is learned through the strength of the Gezerah Shava that Rabbi Akiva brought previously. Vahainu Nami Mitzvahs Kahuna Ka'amar Shmuel, and this is why Shmuel used the phrase Mitzvahs Kahuna. It's the mitzvah of the Kohen that the Kohanim have to be careful about only from the Kabbalah Sadam, only from where it says V'hikrivu b'nei Aaron es Adam, the sons of Aaron will bring close the blood. Only Kohanim their mitzvahs only begin at that point. The mitzvahs kahuna, the commandments of the Kohanim to be involved and to protect and to make sure only Kohanim are involved, doesn't apply to the shlita. It doesn't apply to the slaughtering of the animal, which precedes the Kabbalah Sadam, which precedes the receiving of the blood and bringing it to the Mizbeach. So the Zera Shimshon, we're going to stop here. The Zera Shimshon has answered his question 2 and 3. As we noted before, he only addresses the issue about Chana later on in this piece, about why she ran up and started telling Eli the whole story of their previous encounter. But here in the first half and part A of this piece, what the Zera Shimshon focused on was why Eli and all of the people made the mistake of thinking that a Kohen was required to do the shlita, and why it took a little Shmuel to come along and to interpret the psukim correctly and explain that, in fact, everyone had made an error, even Eli himself, and that a Kohen was not needed to perform the slaughtering, the shlita. Any zar, even a person who's not a Kohen, could do the shlita only after the shlita, starting with the Kabbalah Sadam and everything after that, all the steps after that. All of those things were mitzvahs kahuna, were things that required, steps that required to be done by a Kohen wearing the proper begodim, the proper clothing. Yashukach for joining in the learning this week. We look forward, God willing, to learning again together in the Zera Shimshon next week.